Barry Loser is the best at football. Halftime oranges chopped by Jim Smith. Ronaldinho Donaldinho. Ever since the World Cup started, everyone in school has been completely into football. Like the other Saturday when my best friend Bunky was playing keepy uppy in Mogden Park. 177, 178, 179, he counted, showing off how many times he could do it. Pull the other one, Bunkoid, burped Darren Darrenofsky, slurping on a can of World Cup flavor Frankel. Even Ronaldinho Donaldinho can't do it that many times. Ronaldinho Donaldinho is the coolest footballer in the whole wide world, amen. He plays for the Moldovan football team, who everyone reckons are going to win the World Cup easily. Ronaldinho Donaldinho? Sniggled Nancy, looking up from the book she was reading. That's the stupidest name I've ever heard. Sharonella leaned her head on Nancy's shoulder like she was a parrot. Oh my days, Nance, she squawked. You trying to tell me you've never heard of Ronaldinho Donaldinho? Nancy shrugged. I'm just not that into football, she said. You don't know what you're missing, babes, said Sharonella, whipping a football card out of her pocket. Gordon smugly sidled up with his sort of servant, Stuart Schmendricks. Ronaldinho Donaldinho? He said. Yeah, he's all right, I suppose. Think you're pretty good then, do you? Said a voice from behind us, and I turned round. Standing in front of me were 5 really tall, smug-looking kids wearing shiny green football kits. On the front of their t-shirts were the words Green Giants. Darren crumpled an empty Frankel can in one hand and kicked it towards a bin. It flew straight over and domped a squirrel off a branch. Who are you lot when you're at home? Barked Darren as the squirrel limped off. We're the Green Giants, said the kid at the front whose blonde hair was combed so neatly it looked like Nancy's open book. He pointed at his t-shirt. Can't you Mogden losers read? Stuart Schmendricks pointed at Nancy. We can read, he said. Look, she's reading right now. Whatever, said the kid next to the blonde one. Come on Tarquin, let's get out of here, it stinks. That's 'cause of Mogden sewage works, said Sharonella, as if that was a good thing. The smell blows over this way when the wind's going in the right direction? Delightful, chuckled Tarquin. Of course, we don't have that problem up in Avocado Hill. What is Avocado Hill? Avocado Hill is the posh little village that sits on top of a slope overlooking Mogden town. Tarquin dropped the ball he was holding and kicked it back up with his foot, ducking to catch it on the back of his neck, then flicking his head to make it bounce into his hands again. Pretty impressive, said Nancy. And I don't even like football. Tarquin turned to Bunky. I was watching you keepy uppying, he said. Not bad for a Mogdener. Thanks, grinned Bunky, who thinks he's the best at football out of all of us, probably 'cause he is. Tell you what, said Tarquin. We've got a little stadium up in Avu Hill, nothing fancy, just a few hundred seats. You lot fancy a game next Saturday, after the World Cup final? Bunky looked at the ball in Tarquin's hands and gulped. Oh, I'm busy then, he said. Me too, squawked Sharonella. I'm going to the, toilet. With me, burped Darren, putting his hand up in the air. Gordon pulled his phone out of his pocket. Do you know what, he said, tapping the screen. I'm fully booked for the next 3 weeks. He's my boss, said Stuart, pointing at Smugly. So looks like I'll be tied up as well. I looked round at my friends. How come I didn't know about all these plans? I said. Tarquin peered down at me. You're a funny little specimen, aren't you? He chuckled. What's that supposed to mean? I asked. The kid next to Tarquin rolled his eyes. Your pals are making excuses, he explained. They're just afraid to play the green giants. You know when you're the last person to work something out and it makes you feel all stupid, so you say something cocky to make yourself look cool? We'll see you on Saturday, I said, twizzling round to face the green giants. And we're gonna smash you avocados into a paste. Picking the team. The green giants wandered off and Bunky glared at me. What in the name of uncoolness was that all about? He cried. What are you afraid of, Bunky? I said, pretending it was no big deal. I thought you were the best footballer in Mobden school. I suppose that is true, said Bunky. But we don't even have a team, warbled Stuart. Well then, I said, still trying to make up for looking like a loser 3 minutes earlier. We'd better make one. Bunky stroked the bit of his face where his beard will be when he's older. Let me see, he said. I'd be up front, of course. Darren, you can go in midfield. Shotza and Stewart in defense and Gordon in goal. Wait a millisecond, I said. What about me and Nancy? Leave me out of this, said Nancy, not even looking up from her book. You don't want to play, do you, Barry? Asked Bunky. Darren cracked open another Frankel. Yeah, loser, he said. You're rubbish at football. No, I'm not. I said, even though it was true. I scratched my head, and my brain wriggled inside its skull, immediately coming up with one of its amaze-keel ideas. I've got it! I cried. I can be your football coach. Coach loser. You have got to be kidding, laughed Gordon. Darren took a slurp of Frankel. Forget about it, loser, he belched. Oh, please, I said, immediately losing my keelness and dropping to OB my knees. Don't leave me on the sidelines with nobody to talk to. Nancy looked up from her book. Ahem, she ahemed. No offense, Nance, I said, peering up at Bunky. What d'you reckon, Captain? I smiled, calling him that so he'd go along with my plan. Bunky ruffled my hair like I was his son. It's a nice idea, Baz, but you don't actually know anything about football, do you? That fact might be ever so slightly true, I said, getting up off my knees. But I'm pretty good at bossing people about. And you think that's all it takes to be a coach? Said Gordon. Oui, I said, showing off I could say yes in French, because I've been learning it in school. Sharonella's nose crinkled up. Ugh. We don't need to hear about your toilet habits, Barry, she said. Oui, and yeah, lozoid, said Darren. Nice idea about the team, but I don't think we'll be needing your services, okay? Right, that's it, I said, stomping my foot and preparing to activate Operation Pain-O Chocolate. I didn't want to do this, but it looks like I'm gonna have to. Operation Pain-O Chocolate. I rotated myself on the spot like a tray of Pain-O chocolates in a bakery shop window and walked away from my ex-friends. I was putting on a fake limp to make them feel extra sorry for me. Oh, don't be like that, Barry, called Bunky. No, you're right, I mumbled over my shoulder. What do you lot need a useless old loser like me for? Just let him go, Bunky, said Gordon smugly, who's always trying to steal my best friend off me and probably thought this was the perfect time to put his evil plan into action. I spotted a piece of gravel lying on the floor and wondered if I should fake a trip over it to really get them feeling bad. I'll be all right, I mumbled. Don't you worry about Barry Loser, he'll get over it in a couple of weeks or so. I carried limping off for a couple of milliseconds until I heard Sharonella's mouth opening. Coach Loser, she said, trying the name out for size. I suppose it has got a tiny bit of a ring to it. I chuckled to myself. The old Pain-O Chalk trick never fails. I muttered, widening my ear holes by 0.3 millimeters each, trying to hear if anyone was nodding their head to what Shaz just said. But heads nodding aren't as easy to hear as mouths opening. I carried on facing away from my friends. "What do you reckon, Bunk?" I croaked, shortening Bunky's name, to show Gordon smugly how much of his best friend I was. "How about doing an old pal a favor?" Everything went quiet for a millisecond. "Oh, all right," sighed Bunky, as his bum started to cry. Crying freakoids. "Hey, you all right, little fella?" said Bunky, pulling a crying freakoid out of his pocket. Crying freakoids are the latest craze at school apart from football, of course. They're these tiny football-shaped toys which sort of act like pets you have to look after. They're the size of a gobs topper with batteries inside and a mini speaker on the back. On the front are little screens with faces on them that show what mood the ball's in. Whenever one starts to cry or act unhappy at all, the owner has to work out if it's hungry or needs the toilet or wants a little cuddle to make it feel better. "Hey, that's a point, better check in with Barry Jr., I said, pulling my crying freakoid out of my pocket. I held Barry Jr. up and looked at his face. His eyes were scrunched shut and his mouth was grimacing. "Arg, I think that means he needs a poo," I cried. "You'd better wipe his bum then, Baz," said Shaz, pulling her crying freakoid out of her pocket. I scraped my finger along the bottom of my crying freakoid, which is what you're supposed to do when they need the toilet. Barry Jr. did a happy beep and his grimace turned into a smile. "I don't know what you lot see in those things," said Nancy. "Looks like a lot of hard work to me." "Oh, it is," said Stuart, all seriously. Stuart's crying freakoid is called Stewie No Legs. It was sitting in the palm of his hand doing a sad face, which meant he'd have to sing to it to make it happy. "It's really rewarding once you get used to it though," he sang, and Stewie No Legs did a grin. "Stuart's right, I can't imagine not having my mini Shaz," said Sharonella, giving hers a peck. "And they grow up so fast, don't they?" Bunky, whose crying freakoid is called Bunky too, nodded. "Life's never the same once you've had one of these little critters," he sniggled. He patted Bunky too on the head and it immediately stopped crying. "Oh, looks like somebody's hungry," said Gordon, pointing at his freakoid. Its mouth was wide open, digital drool dripping out of it. He poked his finger at the mouth bit, which is what you do when one of them needs feeding. "There, that's better isn't it, Lil Gordy?" he cooed. "Ugh, I can't take any more of this," said Nancy, slamming her book shut. "I think I'll go and find something more interesting to do." "It's your life, workin'," shouted Darren as she wandered off, and he whipped Dazzy Rascal out of his pocket. Its eyes were closed and it purred quietly. "Ooh, you are lucky, Daz," whispered Shotza. "Wish my one sleep through like that." "It was a different story last night, Shaz," yawned Darren. "I was up with him every 2 hours." "Worth it though, innit?" I said, sounding like my mum when she talks to her mum friends about my baby brother Desmond. The sun was going down and my nose twitched, sniffing the smell of my dinner wafting over from my house, mixed in with the stench of Mobden sewers. "I'll see you lot bright and early Monday morning," I said, plopping Barry Jr. in my pocket. "If we're gonna beat those green giants, we've got a lot of work to do." No banana. Suddenly it was Monday morning and we were all standing in the playground at school. "First things first," I said, clapping my hands together. "We need a team name." "Well, you should be good at this, Bazzy," said Shaz. "You're always coming up with stupid names for stuff." "Thank you, Sharonella," I said, thinking back on all the amazing names I've come up with since I've been alive, including for my 9 hamsters, all of which are now completely dead. "How about the Darrens?" said Darren, and I scoffed. "Nice try, Darrenovsky," I said. "But no banana." Gordon's Giants, said Gordon, and Shotza shook her head. That sounds exactly like Green Giants, she said. Yeah, expect it's Gordon's instead of green, snapped Gordon. Guys, I said in my Coach Loser voice, which is just my normal, regular voice. Let's try and support each other's ideas, shall we? Bunky scratched his no-beard. The Mogden Maniacs, he said, and I clicked my fingers. Mogden Maniacs. I've got it! I cried. The Mogden Maniacs. That's what I said, muttered Bunky. Is it? I said. Well, shall we just go with my idea instead? Bunky squinted, his tiny little brain getting all confused. Okay, he said. We should probably get on with some practice anyway. Good point, Captain, I said. Everybody drop and give me 100. 100 what? Asked Stuart. Press-ups, of keels, I grinned. Did. Why don't you give me 100 press-ups, said Darren, as Bunky got on the ground and started pumping his arms up and down. Good boy, Captain. I smiled, wondering if I was overdoing the whole captain thing a bit. 1, 2, 3, he panted, his face going red. Sharonella joined in. That's the spirit, Shaz. I boomed. Schmendrix, smugly, don't hold back. You too, Daranovsky. Stuart and his sort of boss dropped to their knees next to Shotza. 1, 2. Gasped Gordon. I'm doing this for the team, 3, 4, not for you, loser. That's Coach Loser to you, I said. If you say that one more time, said Darren, not finishing his sentence. Right, that's 100 more press-ups for you, Daranovsky, I shouted. What are you, a maniac or a mouse? I was really beginning to get into this being a coach thing. Darren looked down at the ball in his hands. You want me to act like a maniac? He asked. Yes, please, I smiled. And he booted the ball right at my schnozzle. Queenie down. Arg, my prize-winning hooter. I screamed as the football boinked off my nose and into the air. The ball arched across the sky like a sped-up mini-moon. Heads up, Queenie, cried a freckly little kittywinkle, and pay no chalk ed round to see Queenie, Mogden School's head dinner lady. Not that me and my friends call our dinner ladies, we call them dinner dames because it's keeler. Queenie is 300 years old, the height of a bollard, and needs a walking stick to get around. But that doesn't stop everyone being completely afraid of her. She's married to Mr. Walbioff, the school caretaker who's been working on a doll's house-sized model of Mogden for the last 8 trillion years that he keeps on display in the school foyer. I think he only does it to get away from Queenie. The ball was still speeding through the air, by the way. What's that? Growled Queenie, turning her head round as a ball-shaped shadow crept across her face. I scrunched my eyes shut for a millisecond, opening them to see a circle of kittywinkles standing round a knocked-over bollard wearing a gray wig. Then I realized it was Queenie. Queenie's wrinkly eyelids fluttered open like a million-year-old butterfly stretching its wings after a particularly long snooze, and the kittywinkles screamed. Queenie grabbed her stick and pulled herself back up to bollard height. Which one of you little brats bonked Queenie on the bonce? She squawked. I rotated myself on the spot like an out-of-date tray of Pano chalks. Pissed, Bunky. I whispered, my back to Queenie now. Is she looking at me? 100, gasped Bunky, as I felt a walking stick tap me on the shoulder. Queenie's drawer. I twizzled myself round at 0.2 millimeters per hour until I was face to face with Queenie's face. That little lassie tells me it was this little loser what knocked old Queenie down, she said, pointing over her shoulder at the freckly kittywinkle from earlier. It was a mistake, Queenie. I stuttered as my pocket started to cry. What's that noise? Asked Queenie, turning the dials up on her hearing aids. My body turned to stone and a zigzag of fear crackled through it, breaking me into a billion bits of glued-together gravel. And nothing, I said, trying to suck my pocket in so she wouldn't spot the crying freakoid. I'd seen Queenie confiscate people's prized possessions before, and I didn't want it happening to me. Rumor had it she locked them inside a ginormous drawer hidden away somewhere in a cold, dark corner of the staff room. And once something went inside that drawer, it never came out again. Nothing, eh? Said Queenie, waggling her nostrils. Doesn't sound like nothing to me. I looked at Queenie's hearing aids and thought how lucky she was her nostrils didn't have smelling aids in them too, because I'd just blown off. I hope for your sake it isn't one of those cry-why freaky thingies, she warbled. You know they've been banned in school, don't you, laddie? A clip-clopping noise got louder and louder then stopped. Dolly, the nicest, fattest dinner dame in Mobden school, had appeared on behind Queenie. Everything all right over here? She smiled, and Queenie blinked. Yep, she snapped, not even looking at Dolly. I peered at the two dinner dames, standing there like a couple of bollards that had been concreted into the pavement too close together. I was just having a little word with Loser here about the importance of not bonking head dinner ladies on the, head, said Queenie. Dolly winked at me. I'm sure Barry's got the message, she said. Barry, have you got the message? Ping! I said, doing the noise of a phone getting a message, and Queenie scrunched up her already scrunched up face. I'm watching you, Loser, she shouted, hobbling off in the direction of a kittywinkle picking daisies. And don't you forget it. Home time. The bell clanged and we all headed back into school. I watched the clock tick its way to 3:30, patting my pocket every few minutes to keep Barry Jr. quiet. And then it was home time. Off you go, you blooming maniacs, I said at the top of my road. And remember to get a good night's sleep, we've got a lot of work to do tomorrow. Wait, Voids, Loser, burped Darren. That's another 10 press-ups for you, Darrenovsky, I shouted in my jokey voice. It's important as a football coach to have a bit of fun with your team at the end of a hard day. See you later, Daddy-o, said Bunky, strolling off without giving me a triple reverse upside-down salute, which is what he usually does. Not if I see you first, Captain. I called back, hoping all this captain business wasn't going to his head. I walked up to my house, put the key in the door, turned it, pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. Sozzles about how boring that last sentence was, by the way. Boo love, cooed my mum as I forward rolled into the living room, the way my favorite TV star, future rat boy, would. Afternoon mumsicles, I called back, jumping onto the sofa and clicking the telly on. Boy, gurgled my baby brother Desmond, stumbling into the room. You wanna play with me? I ruffled Des's hair like he was my kid brother, which he is. Not now, Desi, I smiled. Your big bruv's had a busy day. He's a football coach now, did you know that? Des stared at me, drool dripping out of his mouth like a crying freakoid at feeding time. Just then the front door opened. Boo, called my dad and I looked at Des, doing my what's dad doing home this early face. Loser family laptop. What are you doing home this early, Dad? I said, turning my face into a sentence, and he slumped into the chair next to me. Ugh, I've been on one of these blooming team-building courses with work, he groaned. Only good thing about M is they finish early. I said, completely bored with what he was talking about already. My mum walked into the room with a tray of Fico's chocolate digestives. Ooh, how was it, Kenneth? She asked. I closed my eyes, wondering why they were still nattering about something so yonsome. Do you mind? I said. I'm trying to concentrate. We've got a big game coming up on Saturday. A big game? Said my dad. What's all this about, Barry? Well, I said. Tarquin from the Green Giants challenged us to a showdown in Avocado Hill. Only problem was, Bunky and the team didn't think to it. Then I activated was up Operation Pay No Chocolate and hey presto, looks like I'm the mobbed-in Maniacs coach. Okay, said my dad, looking like he didn't know what in the keelness I was talking about. He grabbed the remote control out of my lap and flipped the telly onto the football channel. Yeah, I've signed us up against the Green Giants this Saturday, I carried on. So I've really got my work cut out. Uh-huh, mumbled my dad, staring at the screen. Smoldovia, who wore yellow outfits, were playing a team in blue. And here comes Donaldio, boomed the commentator through the television speakers. I zoomed my eyes in, spotting Donaldio kicking a ball towards the goal. He nutmegs guacamole, takes it past the defenders, roared the commentator. Stops, shoots. Goal! Cried my dad, and the TV cut to a shot of the Moldovan team's coach jumping up and down on the sidelines, cheering and shouting at his players. That gives me an idea. I muttered to myself, reaching across to the coffee table and grabbing the loser family laptop. Smoogle. I opened the lid of the laptop, clicked on the internet and typed www.smoogle.com into the bar at the top. Smoogle, in case you didn't know, is the keyless search engine in the whole wide world wide web. Amen. It was invented by Wolf Tisler, who's this child genius that's sort of like me but with frizzier hair and glasses. Once I was on the Smoogle page, I tapped the word Moldovan coach into its search bar, pressed enter, and a whole page of photos flashed up on the screen. Moldovan coaches are amongst the most dangerous and dilapidated in the world, read a caption underneath a picture of a scuffed-up brown and orange one. I ignored that photo and clicked on one of a man who looked pretty much exactly like the person I'd just seen on the telly. The laptop screen went blank for a millisecond, then a bright yellow page popped up. Now we're talking, I said, immediately clicking on Chip Snyder's top tips. Coach Loser's Nursery for Crying Freakoids. Mornkeels, team. I yawned in the playground the next morning. Barry Jr. had kept me up half the night crying his head off, but I was still looking forward to putting some of Chip Snyder's top tips into action. I held up an empty shoebox I'd brought from home and gave it a waggle, waiting for someone to ask me what it was for. Yo, Coach Loser into house, grinned Bunky, bouncing the official mobbed-in Maniacs football off his knee and booting it to Darren. Good to see you, Captain, I said, picked wondering when we'd be getting back to calling each other by our normal, everyday names. Jocelyn Twiggs from my class tapped me on the shoulder. Hey Baza, are you the lot who's playing the Green Giants in Avocado Hill this Saturday? He asked. Yeah, what's it got to do with you, Twiggs? Burped Darren. I put my hand up to calm Darren down. That's right, Jossie, I said. How'd you know about that? They've put posters up all round town, said Jocelyn. Big, shiny, colorful ones too. Must have cost a fortune. Gulp, said Sharonella. Nancy strolled over with a tape measure in her hand. How's it going, Coach? She chuckled. Nothing a bit of hard work can't sort out, I said, as she wrapped her tape measure around the trunk of a nearby tree. What in the name of playing it unkeel are you doing? I said, waggling my shoebox in the air. I was beginning to get ever so slightly annoyed that nobody had noticed it yet. Oh this, said Nancy, jotting something down in a notebook. I've joined the Miniature Mobbed-in Voluntary Measurement Committee. Stared at Nancy like she was speaking in Moldovan. Excuse me? I said, showing off I could say excuse me in Moldovan. I'm measuring stuff for Mr. Walbioff's doll's house project, explained Nancy. I write down the size in this book then divide it by 100. That way Mr. Walbioff knows how small to make the models. It's your life, I said, as Gordon Smugly and his sort of servant ambled up. What's that shoebox for, Coach Loser? Asked Stuart. Thank you, Stuart, I said, relieved somebody had finally noticed it. Okay, team, gather round, I've got something to say. The Maniacs all gathered round and I looked each one of them in the eye, the way Chip Snyder tells you to in his top tip number 12. Here's the deal, people, I said, snatching Minia's out of Sharonella's hand. From now on I'll be looking after your crying tea freakoids. Wah, cried Shotza, not finishing her what. But you can't take my Minia's away from me like that. I plopped Minia's into the shoebox and held my hand out for everyone else's. Come on, Captain, I said, clicking my fingers, and Bunky slow motion handed me Bunky too. What's this all about, Bus? He asked. Bus? I said. Why in the unkeeness are you calling me Bus? Bunky chuckled. I thought it up last night, he said, giving himself a mini reverse salute. What's like a coach but not as good? A bus, get it? I like it, Bunk, sniggled Gordon, and I bit my lip, trying to remember Chip Snyder's top tip number 79, which is this: don't get all jealous when Gordon's trying to steal your best friend. Or maybe that's just one of mine. 2 words, I said, pincering Dazzy Rascal out of Darren's pocket and placing it next to the other crying freakoids. Chip Snyder. Chip Snyder? Said Gordon. Isn't that the Moldovan football coach? I nodded. Yep, turns out he's got a list of top tips on his website. I smiled, as Stuart handed me Stewie No Legs. And number 1 is no distractions, which is why I'm confiscating your crying freakoids. The bell for lessons started clanging and Gordon's mouth opened, getting ready to say something annoying. Save it for later, Smugly, I snapped, grabbing Lil Gordy and plunking him in the official Mobbed-in Maniacs shoebox. Plurgle flurgle. I don't know if you've ever tried keeping a shoebox full of crying freakoids quiet for a whole morning's lessons, but it's not as easy as it sounds. Pissed, Bazzy, whispered Sharonella, leaning over from her desk. Miss Spivak was at the front of the class, warbling on about the history of Mobbed-in sewage works. How's Minia's doing? Hissed Maxie Shaz. Fine, I whispered, peeping between my feet where the shoebox was sitting inside my half-unzipped rucksack. Just keep it stum, would you, Shotza? The last thing we need is Miss Spivak confiscating this lot. Enjoying fatherhood, Barry? Giggled Nancy, who was sitting on the other side of me. Shouldn't you be measuring something? I yawned. I was really beginning to feel sleepy now. Nancy whipped her measuring tape out. Would it actually be that bad, getting your crying freakoid confiscated? She whisper-asked, jotting down the width of her desk. Surely it'd be a break from all in that whining? Lil Gordy started whimpering and I lifted him out of my bag. Don't you know anything? I whispered. If you leave one of these little fellas alone for too long they'll die. Nancy shrugged. I can think of worse things that could happen, she muttered. You're a monster, workin', mumbled Darren, who was slumped over his desk, half asleep. I held Lil Gordy up to my face and gave him a kiss to keep him quiet. Blurg, he tastes of Smugly's pocket. I spluttered, a teeny-weeny bit too loudly. Miss Spivak squinted her eyes, peering across the room at me. Everything all right, loser? She asked. Yes, Miss Spivak, I said, faking a few you're teaching us about sewers. It's, almost like I can smell the actual real-life poos and wheeze. Oh, said Miss Spivak. Yes, well I'm glad I'm getting it across so vividly. Oi, what are you trying to say about my pockets, Barold? Whispered Gordon from behind me. I think he's saying they smell like sewers, said Stuart, but not in a horrible way, just like it was a fact. Hey, Barry, he carried on. What is it, Schmendrix? I said, as soul-quietly as possible. It's the football game, whispered Stuart, doing a blow-off against his plastic seat. It echoed round the classroom and everybody apart from Miss Spivak sniggled. It's playing havoc with my nerves. I rolled my eyes. Can we please talk about this at break? I said, looking up at the clock on the wall. It was almost 11. Bunky tapped me on the shoulder. How's Bunky 2 doing, Bus? He said. Stop calling me that. I hissed. Loser, shouted Miss Spivak. What are you jabbering on about now? I plunked Lil Gordy back into my bag. Oh, I was just saying to Nigel here how interesting this lesson was. Isn't that right, Zuckerberg? Nigel Zuckerberg is Bunky's real-life name, by the way. And he hates being called it. Bunky squinted at me. That's right, Bus, he said through his clenched together teeth. Something's going on here, muttered Miss Spivak to herself, putting her pen down and scraping out of her chair. She clip-clopped down the aisle towards me. What's that wailing noise, loser? She said, getting closer. I closed my knees together, trying to muffle the crying sound wafting out of my rucksack. Wah, wah, I cried, not exactly sure what my plan was, but hoping one would pop into my head soon. Miss Spivak stopped clip-clopping. Are you crying, Barry? She asked. Sharonella gave me a sneaky wink, like she was coming up with one of her use or less ideas. There, Bazzy, she cooed, sliding her arm round my shoulders. Don't tell me you haven't heard, miss? Miss Spivak blinked. Heard what? She asked, looking suspicious. Poor old Barry's had some terrible news this morning, said Sharonella. Yeah, his. She stopped talking for a millisecond, trying to think of what to say. His hamster died again? Miss Spivak looked at me. Is this true, Barry? She asked, and I nodded, thinking back to all the times it had been, which was 9 in case you'd forgotten. Wah, I cried, squeezing a fake tear out of my eye hole, trying to think of what to say next. This hamster, said Miss Spivak, her eyes going all slitty. What was its name? Sharonella glared at me. Quick, Bazzy, come up with one of your amaze-keel names, her eyes said. Or maybe she just whispered it out of her mouth. I crumpled my face up and flicked through my brain like it was a brochure for people looking for hamster names. Plurgle flurgle? I said. And even though I'd said before it and put a question mark on the end, Miss Spivak nodded. The bell for break started clanging and we headed out the door towards the playground. I'm sorry about plurgle flurgle, Barry, called Miss Spivak. Thanks, miss, I said, feeling all sad.